to WCPT's To the Left with Samina and Shauna. And now your host, Samina Mustafa and Shauna East.
Thanks, Lady D.
Hey.
He prefers Dennis.
Okay, Dennis.
Is his preferred name.
It's great to see you, Dennis.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, so I'm Samina Mustafa.
I'm Shauna East.
You're listening to the Left. We are back. God, it has just been a really sleepy week. There's like
I got so much rest.
All right.
I am just been chilling.
Just chilling. We're going to have some fun guests on in a minute, but two folks who have worked in electoral politics behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Because we want to go ahead.
We want to feature some folks that are the unsung heroes. So oftentimes we hear from the candidates, the stars, so to speak, and we think there are some stars that aren't getting enough attention, and those are the folks doing the work.
Absolutely. So we're going to have Jackrabbit Pollock, who worked locally with our revolution.
And also on the Bernie Sanders campaign in 2015 and 2016 as a super volunteer.
Yeah. And then Erica Nanton, who listeners of the show would remember she was on our first show and was very active in Amara Enia's campaign, mayoral campaign.
Yep.
So it'll be really great to have her back on.
And hopefully soon we will be on Facebook Live.
Yeah.
And then you'll be able to see them.
So if you're listening to this, you probably are listening on a radio device. This is WCPT 820, but we have a Facebook page. All of our handles are at To the Left Radio, and hopefully pretty soon we'll be on our own Facebook page, Facebook Live. But before we get to Erica and Jackrabbit, let's talk about what happened this week. Did you know that this week marked the 16th anniversary of the Iraq War?
I did, and I actually very well remembered the beginning of the Iraq War because it was right after my birthday, so my birthday's March 20th.
Happy birthday, Shauna!
Shameless plug for my birthday, and I lived in England at the time, and there was a lot of backlash from the British folks around in the town that I lived in. They'd hear my accent and they would come up and confront me because they didn't want England to get involved. And they saw, they'd ask, where are you from? Are you from America? And I'd be like, no, Canada.
No, Canada, eh? Did you start saying a boot and a just
They don't know the diff.
Oh, that's just Yankees know the difference. It really struck me as a poignant time for this anniversary. And those of you who are listening can hear my voice is a little hoarse. I'm just getting over something, so apologies. But just the anniversary happening right, not long after the Christchurch mosque shooting, and just thinking about we have had really so much, almost in the case of Afghanistan, we have almost 2 decades of military activity in majority Muslim countries in the Middle East, and it's been part of how Muslims and Islamophobia has sort of become so pervasive on the left and the right, which is really frustrating for me personally. I feel like in 2015 is when I started to see a real resurgence of Islamophobia in the U.S. and to me, the Iraq War definitely played into that. I mean, there were soldiers sharing stories of, I would get letters from school children saying, "Oh, thank you for killing the bad people," and soldiers are coming back now and saying I'm not sure what my work was, what the point was, and I'm very I'm conflicted about it. I feel bad. I met the people, and I'm thinking we often would. There was actually a documentary that's coming out. I can't remember the name of it, but now this had a clip of it, and they're there are times when we would hit the wrong target, and we realized it, and so just a legacy of that. I mean, there's estimates that just in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, that 500,000 people were killed. That's Iraqis, Afghanis, and Pakistanis that were killed, civilians. And so I think we just don't know the scale of the impact of those conflicts and how it's completely transformed those regions, those countries.
Yeah, I have. This is actually, the Iraq War is very personal to me. My younger brother was over there. He joined the National Guard, the Army National Guard, just prior, like when I already knew that we were headed that way. And I was like, what are you doing? And he said, they said I'm never going to have to leave the country. It's the National Guard. And I was like, oh, gosh.
Oh, no, yeah.
And so he was over there. Oh, my God. It was, I don't even know if I should be saying this, but when he got back, I remember asking him, like, did you kill anyone? And he was like, I don't know. Because it's such at a distance. It's like he was actually a sniper, like on a tank. And he said that they would do a lot of property damage and wouldn't really know who was in the buildings. So it's like this detachment. And I that was probably the first time I was really active, became like an activist, like anti-war stuff. And I was working on a documentary for 2 years called My Brother's War, and it was sort of about like how the war changes families of vets, not just, it changes the vet obviously, and my brother has PTSD, but how that also like impacts the entire family around them. And then generational, like my dad's dad was a vet from World War II, and how that like trickles down to generation to generation, and sort of even how they learn to relate to their kids and dealing with anger and all this sort of stuff. So yeah, I totally remember the beginning of the war, and I can't believe it was that long ago, but it's crazy.
And what, again, I'm going to go back to is that people, there were vigils for the Christchurch shooting, understandably, but it's kind of like, well, let's remember that, there's at least 500,000 people. The estimates are pretty fuzzy, that were, because people, they're indirect sort of deaths, like maybe somebody, destroyed a source of water or something. Like there were other impacts on this region that are perhaps, whether it's stress, it's trauma, it's all these things. And people don't do a good job of remembering, veterans and sort of the folks who were boots on the ground, literally, but they also completely dehumanize the people who live in those countries and sort of forget, like, oh, this is where somebody lived. This was a neighborhood. This was somebody's home. This was somebody's, like their livelihood, their business was bombed or what have you. And I just think that's what's missing in all of this. And it's really, to me, frustrating because I imagine, like, now those people look like me. This is like what I was saying last week. So it's to me, it's really frustrating. But I just hope more and more people are talking about this, because we have a presidential campaign coming up, and we need to think about, like, okay, what are you going to do about defense spending and pulling us out of conflicts and not entering additional conflicts? So I think it's incredibly important.
Is there anyone that you think is actually going in that direction, or that you trust to go in that direction?
I think there's some good, like, I know that, Ro Khanna and Bernie Sanders have done great work on the war in Yemen and have been, I hate to use the phrase beating that drum, but like talking about, like, we have too much of our spending and military spending. I mean, we had in the last 2 years record military budgets. I mean, it's over $1 trillion if you add up all the money that's going, and that's about a quarter of the federal budget total. And it's just it's staggering. And then you think, like, oh, Flint still doesn't have clean water, and that would have been,
we don't have any money for you to have health care, for Medicare for all, and things like that. And it's like, well, why aren't you saying anything about this incredible spending that's been going on for decades now?
Right. And again, the impact has been widespread. It's why we have, refugees and asylum seekers and people who are fleeing really conflicts that we contributed to. Mm-hmm. So, but I think that needs to be part of it, is like, even if you don't like care about politics, you're not like a political junkie like we are. It's like all of these conflicts have a direct impact, because all that money is going somewhere else, and it's actually hurting people, and it could be helping people here.
And I want to just recommend a movie that came out recently just for folks who who aren't, like Samina just said, political nerds like we are. That's an easily digestible, entertaining film that will educate you on like what happened with the Iraq War and leading up to it. And that would be go see Vice,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I heard that there was some like liberties taken with.
Yeah, but I mean, it really does explain like the capitalism, the relationship to the oil, Halliburton, like all of this stuff in a way that's easy to digest.
Okay.
So I recommend checking it out
Yeah,
for
I mean,
people
Dick
who
Cheney,
aren't nerds.
Yeah, Dick Cheney was, like he made money from people getting killed, basically.
Right. Correct.
But let's switch gears. Let's come back a little bit closer to home. There's a couple of things that were just bubbled up in the last couple of days, and we're not going to talk about the Mueller report right now. I think there's enough been said about that. But something that's going to align with what we're talking about later, which is campaigns. The DCCC just came out with a statement. Cheri Bustos, Congresswoman from Illinois, who's the head of DCCC, they came out with a statement saying they're going to essentially punish firms who help primary challengers, anyone who's challenging an incumbent. And a lot of people said, well, this is, you're completely missing the boat. You're not understanding where the party is. You're trying to protect these incumbents that frankly aren't aligned with their district or aren't where the party is. But to me, the issue with that is it's also very counter to what the Democrats claim is their base. It's like you say people of color, women of color are your base, and the two primary the two folks who won after challenging incumbents are Ayanna Pressley and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who are both women of color who beat white men.
So does that mean they're going to protect Ilhan Omar and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is my question?
No. So, yeah, exactly. Those two things. One, are you going to then, come down on the people who are already talking about challenging Ilhan Omar? But also, are you then the party allegedly that relies on women of color going to essentially punish anyone who helps change the ratio in Congress? I mean, we're still, even after all these women running, including myself, we went from roughly 19% of Congress are women, and now we're up to like a little bit under 24%.
So it's going to prevent Congress from being more equitable, more representational of the population, less women. It's going to protect more white male incumbents.
Yeah, exactly. That to me is the thing that hasn't really been pulled out of this, and it's someone at the DCCC should have thought about this. But again, if you look at their leadership, if you look at who's driving it, it's a centrist. Cheri Bustos is not good she's not a progressive by any stretch.
No, she's with Madigan.
Yeah, I mean, so and she's mentored by Dick Durbin, who's also not a progressive. So this to me is a bad sign for 2020, because this is how you're approaching congressional races. I don't have a lot of hope for how they're going to handle the presidential race. I mean, this is just the mindset of just dysfunction, not listening to your base, and not understanding where the party is, where the country is.
So are they afraid of losing more Joe Crowleys, or what? What do you think precipitated this?
I think, honestly, it's their corporate donor base. They want it. I mean, Joe Crowley was a reliable corporate Democrat.
The lobbyists have built these relationships, and they don't want to lose that.
Right.
They don't want to have to meet a new person and build some new relationships.
Yeah, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is not taking corporate PAC money, which I know there's like some confusion, because there are unions have PACs. There's other PACs that are actually issue oriented, but we're specifically concerned about things like corporate PACs that represent defense contractors. Mm-hmm. And say, for example, Quigley's number one donor, if you look at Open Secrets, is Northrop Grumman, a defense contractor. Mm-hmm. So okay, then he ends up voting for every single defense budget. Not surprising.
Or Geo Group, things like that.
Yeah, which are detaining private prison contractors that are detaining immigrants. And so more needs to be, brought up about what their voting records are. That's a challenge, I think, in general. Like the media isn't covering, the mainstream media isn't covering it, but now you have the party that's basically saying, you know what, everybody's realizing that we need more women and people of color in Congress, and we need more of them to run, and everyone sees the need for reforming our electoral system, hence bills like H.R. 1. But this is, to me, completely a tone-deaf response. It's completely saying like, oh, yeah, we heard you on that stuff, but we just want to protect our own.
And it also means people like us are going to have to spend way more time fighting Democrats, fighting other people on the left, and instead of like who are the perceived bad guys.
Yeah. and that is so, it's, to me, it was not surprising. But
it's exhausting. That's what I have to say, because I'm tired.
Yeah.
I'm tired.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's absurd, but it's also, again, like you are talking out of both sides of your mouth. Like you can't have Tom Perez saying, oh, we're going to reach out to black women and black women voters, and then on the other hand saying, oh, you elected a black woman, you're never going to do that again.
But they're part of their whole sort of optics or PR, as we know, because we were both at the DNC meeting in Chicago last year, was firsts, right? Historic firsts. What is this going to do for the historic firsts PR stunt?
I know.
There's not going to be as many historic firsts for them to ride on.
No. And that, it's, again, they just totally don't care. They don't care. It's all about money and retaining their power. It is not about representing people. You got to
be careful, or else Mike, the white supremacist, might call in again.
Oh, try it, Mike. Try it. You really called into the wrong show. But
I think it's time. We actually have a break now. We're already there.
Oh, we're there. Okay, so guys, we're gonna come back. People, gender neutral. We're coming back in 2 minutes with Erica and Jackrabbit, talking about campaign staff. I'm Samina Mustafa.
I'm Shauna East.
We're producing a show on WCPT Sundays at 1 o'clock.
What should we call it?
How about Smash the Patriarchy?
I like it, but that's a lot of pressure. What about left-leaning ladies?
What about womansplaining?
Yeah, but what about when we have guys on? What about Madigan's Worst Nightmare?
It gets enough attention.
I got it. To the left.
I like that. That could work.
Tune in To the Left with Samina and Shauna on WCPT 820, Sundays at 1.
And we are back. You're listening to the Left. My name is Samina Mustafa.
I'm Shauna East.
And we are back talking about electoral politics, but with a twist. We know that candidates always get the limelight, and we are trying to be more equitable in our coverage. And so we're really excited to have two folks who were critical in campaigns and have worked on in the community a lot. Erica Nanton, who folks will recall from our very first show. Welcome back, Erica.
Hey, how y'all doing?
And we're going to talk about your work on Amara's campaign. And then we've got Jackrabbit Pollock, who worked in Illinois on the Our Revolution Illinois' electoral work, but also was active in the Bernie Sanders campaign. But we're going to start first with Erica. So can you tell folks a little bit about your background and the work you were doing on Amara's campaign?
So I am a community organizer. I work primarily on the south side of Chicago, but I have definitely taken my work across the country through the Poor People's Campaign, National Call for Moral Revival that recently launched in commemoration, not necessarily commemoration, but continuation of Dr. King's vision to bring poor people of all backgrounds together. Me, myself, I have international background. My family is actually from the Caribbean islands, Bahamas, Trinidad, and as well as a part of my family being African American. So I've lived my life in a pretty diverse world. Originally from Miami, Florida, so I grew up in a very mixed community. I learned Spanish at a very young age because of that, and I just kind of grew up in a world where people came from a lot of different places and had to figure out how to live. I'm in Chicago now, and about to marry my fiance, who's from the west side of Chicago. And we are expecting our first child, which I'm excited about. But ultimately, it was an eye-opener to become a part of a community that reminded me so much of the divisions that I saw growing up. I also lived in northern Florida for a while, Jacksonville, which is much more conservative, definitely not Miami. And it was a culture shock. It was the first time I saw Confederate flags. It was the first time that I had really almost like realized I lived in the South, which is a weird thing to say. And so growing up, I had to move between those two areas back and forth a lot as I grew, but they were also socioeconomically different. So one school was very well resourced. My mom, she, as an immigrant woman, she would clean toilets. She worked 3 jobs just so that I could have the zip code to go to the school with the kids that had more resources. But then sometimes she couldn't afford it, so I had to go back to Miami with my grandmother. And then the school there had very little resources. So I would go from like a fully funded classroom to a classroom with no books to a fully funded classroom as I grew. And then I finally looked up one day and I was like, hold on a minute. You know, like, why is this happening to me? Because I'm the same Erica, but the access, the opportunity, and the resources that I'm getting keeps changing with my zip code. And something is really not right about that. And so, yeah, that kind of led me into a lot of the work I do now with schools. Inglewood schools that were recently shut down for closure, I was doing some seminars and teaching students there when they decided to rise up, fight back. They went to Washington, D.C. They went before Betsy DeVos and delivered her a F report card. And they made sure to tell the nation that they are not nameless, faceless thugs, but that they deserve an equal education. So that's been kind of the work I've done. And then started working with Amara on her campaign. I was doing a lot of work with the field and helping with organizing the field to do creative outreach to the community.
And I just want to say, Erica is one of my organizing role models, and she is so inspirational, especially with youth. Like when you're in a room with younger teens and people, like, you know, just around the first time they're voting, you can like let them know their power, and it's so inspiring to watch. So
thank you.
That's one of her many talents.
Yeah. And I know you've done work with groups like Chicago Votes,
yes,
and that do a lot of work with and youth civic engagement, and also a lot of folks saw Amara's campaign really energize younger voters, people who perhaps hadn't voted before or just weren't part of the process. So can you talk a little bit about how that your experience doing that?
Yeah, so before the campaign, that's one of the work I was doing with Good Kids Mad City, one of the co-founders, and I was able to work with some incredible young people who found the organization as well, and some great leaders across the city who've been fighting gun violence. But the difference is with Good Kids Mad City is that we understand that gun violence is a result of other types of violence, economic violence, social violence, all those things that happen to our communities, that the gun violence is not happening in a vacuum, right? But also the police violence that's happening. So basically, Good Kids Mad City came together to have a more nuanced conversation and approach to that, but also with the young people most directly impacted by that violence, the young people whose friends have been killed, the young people who are facing that violence every day. And so in that, we also wanted it to be youth-led, truly youth-led. So as adult leaders, we really just help to inspire, we really help to connect, and we really help to enhance the work that they're already doing. But these young people are brilliant. And one of the passions that I have is that, you know, being that kid who was in, you know, the quote unquote schools in the hood, you know, there's a narrative about us. There's a narrative that we're bad, There's a narrative that we are disruptive and just not good kids. And so that's why that's when we came up with the name Good Kids Mad City, because these are not bad kids. They're good kids. They just live in a mad city. There's also a chapter in Baltimore, and we are moving into other states as well, because this is happening across this country, of young people who are siloed into these low-income communities who are told that they don't have a voice. So one of the biggest things is to help to let those young people see that they are not what's said about them, because it's all the way up to the president that demonizes these children, that makes them faceless and nameless and just like, oh, they have sagging pants and they're just the next criminal, as opposed to the fact that they're the ones that house within them the solutions to these problems. I know I've sat in rooms with young people in Inglewood and on the south side of Chicago, the west side of Chicago, and I've literally heard better solutions come out of their mouth than half of the elected officials that we currently have. And it's just really sad that they are the most demonized voices. They are the voices that are least to be heard. So I think one of the biggest works that we did was to truly let them lead. I know Good Kids Mad City hosted some open mics that were incredible with the campaign, where they brought in voices of young people to share the stories of what it's like to grow up in these environments, the solutions that they came, but they did it through art and poetry. And that's one of the things I love about Good Kids Mad City, is that we incorporate art, music, and culture into the message. So these are young people who are using their voices, their songs, their spoken word, their dance, like whatever they have to help communicate messages and pierce through the narrative. So it's very powerful, and the campaign basically just made space for it. The campaign just made space for them to do it and to feel good about it and to get their messages across.
Very cool. Let's bring Jackrabbit into the conversation. So I know you obviously from the Bernie Sanders campaign, starting all the way back in 2015. If you want to talk a little bit about your role as a super volunteer for several years and what that meant to you and your experience.
Sure. It's great to be here. Thanks, both of you, very much for having me here, and it's awesome to be with an amazing guest like Erica. I have to start off by giving a shout out to my Illinois for Bernie people. It's got to be the first thing I do, because, it's all about community. It's all about being here together. And that's really what, I want to kind of riff off of where Erica was coming from, because I think that, the idea, the thing that really resonated for me from what I heard, from what she was talking about, is just the kids themselves that Erica is working with, kind of changing, pushing back against the narrative that the dominant society has pushed on them. And I feel what I've been trying to do in the past few years with the electoral work that I've been doing is to really kind of come to the people, go to the people, instead of the national narratives that are kind of dominated by the media and the establishment parties, to really kind of see what I can do, as an individual organizer, to kind of help to empower people, bring people together, and kind of have people find their own voice, and and kind of push back against that kind of status quo that's imposed upon them by the media and political establishment. And I feel I found when Shauna and I met, I feel we kind of really work together really well, because we both are really dedicated to democracy and to the grassroots. I started off with People for Bernie back in 2015. And it was just totally grassroots, kind of starting from the ground up, trying to get harness the excitement about the Bernie Sanders campaign. We were doing some national phone calls, getting people involved. I'm really proud of the work that we did. We inspired a lot of people who went on to work on the campaign and do their own, form their own organizations and stuff like that. But also really just kind of brought together what I think is just a wonderful family of organizers and activists here in Chicago and the Illinois area to do some really great work. That was in 2015, 2016, and I'm really proud of that stuff. Then after that, once we kind of came in touch with the actual official campaign here in Chicago that was working in Illinois, I feel we identified that there was a real lack of democracy just in the entire political process. And so we went on to create the People's Convention in Philadelphia, which was all about crowdsourcing democracy, developing a people's platform, We reached out to organizations around the country and did the best we could to crowdsource. What is the platform that the people want for to be represented by the politicians
And the People's Convention was like an alternative to the DNC convention, because at that point it looked like the DNC convention was sort of just like a for show. Like there wasn't actually any real democracy that was going to happen there. So that was the premise behind the People's Convention, that people were going to be there protesting anyways. And so we had like a little convention that was really awesome. 1,000 people came. Yeah. We raised enough money to make it free and open to the public so anyone could come, and we involved local groups from Philly. You want to talk a little bit about that?
I'm just so excited about it. Yeah, I mean, we had workshops, there was like networking, kind of like facilitation, and but I mean that's really kind of speaks to the heart of what we need to see. I think how we need to see our the political situation in the United States transform. I mean, just really, we've been lied to for so long about what our power is, who we are, how we identify, and I think, again, I come back to this the horrible image that Southside Chicago kids have of themselves, and how that's really these expressions of white supremacy in the world. We all need to confront those, and I think that by being able to kind of really step back from what we're being told and develop power for the people is what it's really about. So I actually also worked with Our Revolution in the 2018 elections. I was hired on for a few months, and I was I just wanted to kind of say that I was very disappointed in how things went. I saw that there were a handful of people who were involved in that organization at the time who were pushing really hard to engage with people, be more democratic, be more involved from the bottom up, and that was really kind of resisted by a couple people who were hoarding power in the organization. It was very disappointing, and so that was really actually very hard for me to be a part of. And so I really do want to kind of put that out there, that I'm really proud of the work that I'm doing right now, which is to kind of resuscitate the Illinois for Bernie group that Shauna and I put together back in 2015 to try and kind of just really harness and organize the grassroots for the upcoming election.
So going back to that, and apologies everyone, I'm having a little bit of a coughing fit here. Speaking to that, Jackrabbit, about sort of the lack of democracy in the organization, how would you assess what's happening now? And do you think, say, if you were going to be looking at the Bernie Sanders organization, do you think there's some lessons that they've learned and they're taking into 2020? Or do you feel like there's still, you as someone who literally was on the ground, see that they haven't incorporated?
No, I mean, I think that I definitely sense a massive change in the way that the Sanders campaign is approaching this primary election. I think there's no question about it. I think that, a lot of what people miss about 2015 is that a lot of Bernie's infrastructure showed up out of nowhere. I mean, he had to hire whoever was left around who wasn't hired by the Hillary campaign. You know what I mean? So he was just looking under rugs. He was open up trash cans. Who's that? Oh, I got that guy. And so I think I think there's a lot of an opportunity today that he's really taken advantage of to look around for good people, actual progressive folks who are going to make the campaign a lot more representative of the principles that he stands for. And I think you see that in the people that he's hired. I think it's all out there, and I think that, we also understand that he's put in, protections in place so that a lot of the problems that happened in the 2016 primary don't happen again. So I definitely feel like there's been a change. I'm still, because I am, really kind of a person who really believes in radical democracy. I'm still waiting to see like just how far this has gone. But there's no question in my mind that it's definitely been improved. And I'll tell you something else really briefly. Shauna and I actually put together a national phone call kind of like on the spur of the moment to kind of get some feedback from people, like, because we have a very wide network of people who have worked, on the campaign in other states. Like I said, I mean, we had these national conversations, so we're involved in with a lot of people, and just got feedback from people who had worked on the campaign, the problems that they had, and I was really excited to see that somebody who was from the Sanders office actually wanted to hear from us. What did we get out of that conversation on that phone conversation?
Yeah, they accepted our notes, they followed up with us, and then some of the things that happened with the campaign right after that seemed to sort of reflect what people like Anoa and Anthony and all of the folks that we were involved in 2016 with were saying. So that was promising, or else I really wouldn't even be involved right now. But one thing that I wanted to say, knowing both you guys and gals, is that both of you are not just electoral organizers. You guys are also involved in movement work. So, Erica, like how does your movement work sort of inform your electoral work and vice versa?
Oh, that's a really good one. So yeah, working on the recent campaign for mayor with Amara, it's been definitely coming right out of the Poor People's Campaign when we did the 40 days, which was to occupy the capitals all across the country, demanding we had different pillars that we were demanding for poor folks. And I think what it is that I've definitely seen is that as much as I think most of us in the movement work who also do electoral work, I can't speak for all of us, but I think most of us, we kind of share a vision of seeing the energy and the spirit of the movements inform the way that the electoral work is done. I think that's kind of like our heart and why we even bother, because it can be disappointing at times. The thing that I think I see, though, is that I believe that there are people that have the heart of the movement, right? And then you get into the electoral work and you realize that there is a pull for you to almost give up, almost like when you're a kid and somebody tells you, Santa Claus isn't real anymore, so give it up.
He's not?
Yeah, that's sometimes how I think.
Put away your...
Yeah. It's time to put away.
Spoiler alert.
I know. We are so sorry.
But yeah, for real, I think that's the way movement folks are sometimes treated. When they get into the electoral work, as if we believe in Santa Claus, or as if we,
pie in the sky.
Yeah, we're very pie in the sky, and it's almost like people are attracted to our energy, and they like that, and they think it's like something that can just be contained and replicated without understanding what goes behind that energy. And then when you get there, it's kind of like, okay, that's cute, but here's how it really is, right? Not realizing that the only way we will ever realize the vision of, like what Jack Irvin said, radical democracy and some of these more ambitious policies and things that we really want to see become reality is that at some point, somebody got to not give it up. At some point, there has to be people who are not going to give it up, because if when you enter the electoral realm, you fall into that, everybody then becomes a cog in the status quo. Right. And I'm sorry to bust the progressive bubble, but there is a progressive status quo too.
Oh, yeah.
There's a status quo even within that, even within progressive politics. And the only way that we're going to actually realize a lot of these visions is that we have to recognize our own status quo that we need to push against. And some of that, it's so funny that you said that, Jack Rabbit, about when Bernie was first just looking for under every rock for just whoever was left over from the Hillary campaign. I think that's the issue, right? Is that sometimes because electoral politics is this thing that's about time. Electoral politics is on a clock.
Right.
That's the thing that I think makes it a little different than the movement, right? The movement is this long game where it's like we understand we're looking for revolutionary change that's been going on for decades, and for things that precede us and that will be after us, and we want to do as much as we can while we still have breath in our bodies to see realized in this time, right? Whereas with electoral politics, you have an election day, okay? Like
it doesn't change,
and it doesn't change,
Yeah.
okay? And so you're now on this clock, and one of the things that creates is urgency. Right. And once you incorporate urgency in a way, not that now don't get me wrong, because one of the parts of your question, Shauna, was how does electoral inform my movement work, right? Is that we could use a little urgency in the movement too now, okay? Yeah. We can use some urgency up in here. So, because that's one of the things that's frustrating about movement work sometimes is that we got people with different backgrounds that are on different clocks on urgency, right? Like my family who lives in island nations, when it comes to climate change, there's a little bit of urgency. Okay, because before the superstorm hits the United States, it's already done swallowed up my whole family.
Right.
You know what I mean? So there's urgency, right? And so I think that the way that these things need to bridge is that we have to have a group of people who are willing to step into that electoral realm and not be jaded. And just not take the BS, because that is what happens. They literally tell you to put it down. They literally tell you to like put it away. They literally say, okay, well, that's cute, but that's not for this.
They say we love your energy, but then they break your spirit.
But then they break your spirit, and it's like, nah. And at some point, you have to say, I'm not putting this away because this has to be in this room. Like, we won't put this away. And that's why youth being involved is so important, because they bring a certain amount of energy. They bring a certain amount of vision that is so necessary, because they always ask the question that keeps movements alive, which is why not? Why not? You know what I mean? And that is what we need. And that's ultimately what I think is the bridge. If we can bring that urgency into our movements, but if we can bring that dogmatic, like that energy and that vision that we will not give up because somebody said that's the way it is, I think we could have something.
So that was Erica Nanton, who was most recently with the Amar Enya campaign. You're listening to the Left. We've also got Jackrabbit Pollock, who is working with Our Revolution Illinois. I'm Samina Mustafa.
And I'm Shauna East.
And we are going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. I'm Samina Mustafa.
I'm Shauna East.
We're producing a show on WCPT Sundays at 1 o'clock.
What should we call it?
How about Smash the Patriarchy?
I like it, but that's a lot of pressure. What about left-leaning ladies?
What about woman-splaining?
Yeah, but what about when we have guys on? What about Madigan's Worst Nightmare?
It gets enough attention.
I got it. To the left.
I like that. That could work.
Tune in to the Left with Samina and Shauna on WCPT 820, Sundays at 1.
And we are back. You're listening to the Left. I'm Samina Mustafa.
And I'm Shauna East.
And we are in studio with Erica Nanton, who worked most recently on Amar Enya's campaign, and Jackrabbit Pollock, who was working with Our Revolution Illinois in the 2018 midterms. But we're going to go use the Wayback Machine a little bit. And Shauna, do you want to take us?
So Jackrabbit, we had a question for Erica before the break about you're both doing movement work as well as electoral work, and how those that work informs each other. And you were very involved in Occupy.
Yeah.
You were actually in New York during Occupy Wall Street and were very involved in the assemblies and things like that. And then you were a founder of InterOccupy. So do you want to talk about your work in that movement and sort of how that led to your, because you weren't really involved in electoral work till after Occupy.
No, one of the things that I think is funny about that is that like there was an anti-electoral kind of like vibe in Occupy. I mean, it was very specific. It was like, not, we didn't want to be involved. That was the whole push of it. If there was a elected that came by, we were just like, get out of here. We don't want to hear from you. And so like, when Bernie came along, it's like I had seen clips of him and stuff like that. I was, and I thought that he was a pretty amazing guy, for the stuff that he's done in the past. I got recruited to kind of work on this grassroots stuff, like this national grassroots stuff. I started to take a closer look and I was like, this is pretty amazing. A lot of the stuff that Occupy Wall Street was standing for, this guy is pretty much running on. And it was very odd. I was very surprised. It's not something that I expected. And I definitely was not expecting to see the kind of national response to it, which, in retrospect, I should have expected, because I didn't think that Occupy Wall Street was going to be all that much of a thing. I was in the same way that I was stunned to see like occupations popping up in LA and Philadelphia and like all around the country. Not surprisingly, it did not show up in Chicago because the cops are just that horrible. But
it did show up, but it would get shut down.
Right. Yeah. And but there was a lot of resistance. There was a lot of pushback from people that I had worked with, in Occupy Wall Street. People just didn't want to hear about it. And I was like, no, listen, like this is one of the ways that we access power to make the change that we need to see in the world. It's not enough just to kind of like, wave a sign, Occupy, like that's a tactic, and that's a useful tactic. And it was amazing when it happened. But, look, we really need to be honest about what can we do to actually wield power. What happens when we succeed? And I think one of the problems that I had with Occupy at the time was like, we're not thinking about what happens when we're successful. Like it was really, that was what, so Shauna mentioned InterOccupy. That was just real quickly, that was an attempt to build an infrastructure, communications infrastructure that brought the different occupies around the country together, because it just popped up out of nowhere. It wasn't something that anybody had planned. And so, it was like, well, how do we coordinate? How do we talk to each other? And so, some folks that I was a part of created this, attempted to create a communications infrastructure. And, and I think that's what that's kind of like some of what we were hoping to do with like Illinois for Bernie, is to really kind of let people around the state of Illinois know that they are not alone, that they have access to resources, that they can do things their own way, that they can do it in their own way. They don't have to it's not going to be this top-down thing. People can organize the way that they want to organize, and just allow that leadership, that grassroots leadership, to emerge.
Yeah, and that's, speaking of having grassroots leaders, sort of come up, one thing that I am sensitive to is how homogeneous most campaign staffs are, and that you're not seeing sort of people of color really being groomed as candidates, but you're certainly not seeing people of color and other marginalized groups being groomed as leaders on campaigns either. And so I wanted Erica to tackle that question and just sort of think about, like, you're constantly working to groom youth leaders. Like, how was your experience on the electoral side? Like, what are some lessons that could be brought over?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the big lessons is that because one thing I will say when it comes to diversity, people of color in leadership, I mean, the Amara campaign had it in, tons, so that wasn't really the thing. But I think what happens is, even what we see with this mayoral runoff, right? Because you have two black women who are running for mayor of Chicago, is that when we finally do get identities in the room, then it gives us a chance to actually discuss ideas, right? And I say that to say that when we have people who share a certain identity that we want to put into power, like on the South Side, for example, we have people who are all black, but they have narratives that are in their position of power, where they're on a board or where they're a part of an organization. They are helping to perpetuate gentrification. You know, we have almost all black aldermen in our black wards. You know what I mean? And it becomes a way to not deal with the class divisions, to not deal with the disparities that exist within the communities of color or within those communities, right? So I think what happens with even campaigns is that as more people of color come in, we can talk about the gender disparities more, because now, okay, is it mostly men? You know what I mean? And then if we start to do that, we could talk a little bit more about ideologies, right? Because is it mostly people with neoliberal backgrounds that are really taking these positions? It gets to become more nuanced to our benefit. That's one of the pluses of diversifying, is that it allows us room to dig into things even deeper that we would never get to do because the rooms are always so homogeneous. And so one of the things that I think I definitely see is that there is definitely a break that needs to happen between the idea of who is political and who can lead politically and what they look like and what they talk about and who they know. And we need to break that deeply, because even in the midst of hiring decisions and decisions of who should be in position, there is a propensity to go for the people who already are associated with the established power. The problem with that is that if their background is with the established power, they bring establishment mentalities with them. Yeah. And with establishment mentality, it's the complete antithesis, I said it right, I think, of the way a movement model should work, because you are taught within the environment you're in, whether you're black, white, woman, gay, straight, whatever. We're having that conversation right now with the mayoral candidates, right? That even though they may hold an identity, what is their ideology, right? And a lot of our ideologies are birthed out of the environments that we grow in politically. So if we grow in a heavy neoliberal environment politically, because that's what we did, those are the internships we ran after, all that stuff, that we're going to bring that with us into a campaign. And that needs to be a part, just as much considered as the identity of the person. And we need to not cut off people who have a different association, that maybe work with homeless people or work with people on the streets or work with incarcerated youth who don't even know the names of the power players, right, and not think that that person couldn't be just as effective, if not more so, in a position. So I think that's something.
Yeah. So I know you want to go off of that, but just we're running out of time, so I just wanted to leave a moment to cover. I know you wanted to talk about something that you're working on right now and plug it. If we have a minute. Just
real quick, I'm really very excited about my the anti-racist workshop that I'm working on right now, called Black History for White People, and it's Is it white people or white people? It's white people. Yeah, it's just white people, and it's just really checking. It's really about kind of like confronting white supremacy and kind of fighting back about that, with the belief that the majority of Americans are completely unaware of any real black history, and the goal is to produce advocates for reparations, and so people can find out more about Black History for White People at BH4WP.org, and so we've got some information up there. It's still a work in progress. We don't have the full workshop developed yet, but it's happening, and we should have our first one next month. I'm very excited about it.
Awesome. Erica, what are you working on, and how can...
definitely please follow Good Kids Med City. You can follow on Facebook, Twitter, doing incredible work across the city, and as well as expanding that work. The young people are holding workshops as well to help train other youth. So if you know other youth that would like to get involved, you can check that out. Facebook and Twitter, Good Kids Med City is the best way to keep track. And then as well as No Cop Academy. Please follow that hashtag. It is a movement happening right now in the city against the $95 million police academy being proposed to build, but it has turned into a much larger conversation around inequity and economic inequity in our city and what we decide to invest in, and because of what we think young black and brown and poor folks need, more police rather than more mental health care facilities, schools, and things like that. So it's really turned into a larger, broader conversation. So No Cop Academy, follow that hashtag, Good Kids Med City.
Yeah, and that even just this week, I feel like if we had to pick a movement or a coalition of groups that have transformed the city politics in the last couple of years, it's been the organizers that are part of No Cop Academy. I mean, it's Asada's Daughters, BYP 100, BLM Chicago, and we don't have a third term from Rahm because of those activists. And no Gary McCarthy, no Anita Alvarez. I mean, all of this. I mean, if you think about who runs this city now, it's those activists.
Yes.
And so whoever wins on April 2nd is going to have to respond to those folks.
That's right.
And try not to call them you people.
Okay. All right.
just that's our little plug for how to talk to movement people.
That's right.
Residents, the people who are your constituents, future constituents,
That's
right?
That's it.
Did you have something you wanted to plug, Shauna?
I just want to thank you guys for coming all the way to WCPT Studios on the far northwest side.
I know we're on the edge of Chicago.
Very far for Erica, so thank you so much for coming out.
And thanks for coming back.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And sharing
I
your
love it.
wisdom with us.
Of course. I love being with y'all.
Yeah, no, it's great. And we are actually not here next week.
thankfully I'm tired.
Okay.
So I'm gonna
We're
be sleeping.
actually, we decided to take a vacation day because Shauna's tired. Actually, I'm at a conference. You're going to get to enjoy the stylings of our guests at our Life fundraiser at the Hideout. We had Amara Enya. Speaking of Amara, we had Maria Haddon, Alderwoman-elect of the 49th Ward, and Stephanie Skora, one of the co-authors of the Girl I Guess voter guide. So
and
that's
me and
next week.
Samina.
Yeah, and
You're
yeah,
gonna
we were
hear
there.
a panel discussion from our fundraiser.
We were there too. So, but we have got to go. You're listening to the left. I'm Samina Mustafa,
and I am Shauna East.
and we'll be back in 2 weeks. But you'll hear us next week. Okay. Thanks so much, guys.
Bye.
Bye.